Today is Friday, August 29th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Revival generation takes over the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's our email address, right to our inbox. Shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Joining me today to get through all the news of the day, as we do each and every weekday bright and early, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips. Guys, a lot to get to on the focus story. We've got an ex-psychic warning about a Netflix feature that could open some dangerous doors.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We welcome back Jenn Nizza to talk all about Netflix's new Zodiac watch list. So we'll break it down today.
All right, and on the main thing, Trey, we've got a pastor speaking out about this explicit content that keeps showing up at public libraries.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that's not going away. We even just talked about this, and we touched on it in the conversation about the Kentucky churchgoers who decided to check LGBT books out and just not return them. So we get his take on that and more.
All right, looking forward to the details on that. We'll get to all of that and more starting in 30 seconds.
My papa says the Messiah isn't real. He's just a story.
So what do you believe?
From the Salvation Poem Project comes Light of the World.
I really liked that movie.
You're really going to want your fam to see this. It's Jesus' life, so clear and so fun.
I want to see it again.
See the hand-drawn animated film everyone's talking about.
He's the king of all kings!
He's nothing.
He is the light of the world.
Light of the World. Opening in theaters September 5th. Rated PG.
We're going to go to the news now in 90 seconds. And a former classmate of Minneapolis church shooter Robert Westman says she knew something was off years ago, remembering how he would raise his hand in class and say, "Praise Hitler." He opened fire during Mass at Annunciation Catholic Church, killing 2 children and wounding 17 others, most of them kids. Authorities say all the guns used in the attack were legally purchased, and Westman had no prior criminal record. A disturbing video posted online under his name before being removed showed weapons, bullets, and handwritten notes, fueling speculation about his planning. Westman's former classmate called the violence a spiritual battle, describing it as demonic and saying he needed Jesus. And CBN's new documentary, The Revival Generation, made its debut at the Kennedy Center, highlighting the wave of campus revivals that have led thousands of college students to Christ. The premiere featured worship led by Grammy-winning gospel artist Tasha Cobbs Leonard, with voices like Lisa Bevere and Alveda King calling it evidence of a genuine move of God. The film tells the story of Tanya Pruitt, who has taken her Unite ministry to 17 campuses, seeing more than 100,000 students gather and over 15,000 give their lives to Christ. Those are just some of today's top headlines, and you can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. Hey guys, I really do think these two stories are connected, because as we saw, Jen Psaki and others were saying, no more thoughts and prayers. We just need to ban the guns, or whatever else she's saying needs to happen. But in reality, the only thing that's going to change people and stop this evil from appearing as often as it does is Christ. Because if people turn their hearts to Christ, they're going to be far, far, far less likely to do something like evil like this. And so when you see the revival happening, that is the thing that we need to focus on more than anything else, rather than gun laws or other big government measures that people are clamoring for. Those things are not going to solve it, because guns are just a mechanism of the violence. They're not addressing the heart behind why someone wanted to commit an act of violence. That's still going to be there whether you take away guns or not. And as we see in other countries that have more restrictive policies like the UK, people just start driving cars over people, and they knife attack, and they do all kinds of crazy things. So there's always going to be evil and violence. We have to get to the heart of the matter. And as that one person interviewed in the story about this shooter said, it is a spiritual battle, and you're going up against spiritual forces of wickedness.
Yeah, and we have to keep that in mind. This idea that You know, and we've said this a trillion times, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But
Yeah.
going deeper than that, there's something making people do these things. There's something creating an increase in this activity that wasn't there before. And the very thing that people are attacking, prayer, is the very thing that you need. It's the key ingredient to actually righting the wrongs, the connection to God, this authentic move in our individual lives and our collective lives. And so it's sad to watch people misunderstand prayer and assume that, as we know, you know, the beginning of knowledge is the fear, the reverence of God, right? People think they're going to do this on their own. They're going to figure out how to fix it without him. Well, good luck. This is how we got here, trying to do it without him.
I mean, the reality is that evil is going to happen in this broken world, so we can't. It's not altogether avoidable. That said, I think as Christians, especially in our local community, I mean, particularly in our local communities, we can probably all be, and I'm talking to myself too, we can all be better about checking in on the people around us, right? And getting them plugged into the resources they need to give them hope, because somebody who does something like what this guy did, they don't start there. They start just, dealing with depression, dealing with anxiety, dealing with, in this case, what seems to be gender dysphoria. And as Christians, we have a responsibility to meet people where they're at, to share the hope of the gospel with them so that Jesus will change them, right? Jesus wants you to come to him as you are, but he's not going to leave you as you are. So I think that's one thing. And then two, we have to push back against a culture that wants to normalize somebody who has gender dysphoria and then just affirming it, right? This is just one of a handful of issues that he had. He clearly was dealing with some mental health issues, and there were red flags. And instead of treating him like, okay, these are the red flags, let's get you the care you need, it's okay to feel all those things, let's just affirm it, and let's make it all okay for you to feel those things. That's not how we lovingly care for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting people be affirmed in mental delusions is unhealthy. And it has been pitched as a healthy thing. We even had somebody as one of the directors of our national health department for several years who's a man who thinks he's a woman. And you cannot be healthy and have that mentality going on. And that's not to say that every person that struggles with gender identity is going to turn into some shooter. That's not the case. Like, this is an extra level, but it certainly doesn't help to sit there and affirm people in something like that that's blatantly untrue.
Let me add something to that, because what's going on, just so that we're all understanding here, is that there are potentially very real underlying other mental health issues that are making the person feel that way, that are not being treated, because the treatment has been affirm, affirm, affirm. That's not a treatment. That's actually trapping people in illness, in spiritual and mental illness that is not being treated. And I'm not saying that in a mean or cruel way. I'm saying that in the compassionate thing to do is to actually treat the underlying issues that person is struggling with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, one thing we know we can do in the midst of this is pray for everyone who's been impacted by this, because regardless of what some people say, prayer definitely still matters more than ever. So make sure you're praying. And again, join us at our Substack, faithwired.substack.com. We have a growing community of believers there that are praying through the news of the day together. So make sure you're joining that. All right. We're going to go to the focus story now. And as we mentioned there at the top, Billy, we've got this new feature on Netflix that has Jenn Nizza very concerned. What is it?
Yeah, it's this feature that is called the Zodiac Watch List. They unveiled this on August 21st. It's an astrology hub that basically allows members to browse by their horoscope sign. So they'll put Libra or whatever, and then they'll put movies and TV shows apparently under that sign based on the attributes that person would purportedly have because of their astrological sign. And so that is what they've done. Obviously, they're trying to feed into, it seems, the popularity of the horoscope, which it's always been popular. It's nothing new, but it does feel like there's an increase, or at least an increased attention in Hollywood and media on these sort of occultic things. And make no mistake, people think the horoscope is this benign thing. It is part of occultic practices. It is part of what people are told to avoid.
And why is she warning about this specific feature that's on?
Well, because Jenn, obviously, for those, we've had her on many times. In fact, recently we did. She's a former medium. She became a Christian. She's got a ministry where she tries to warn people all about these different things. But she said this is a demonic practice. She said it plants seeds in people's minds and it opens doors to the demonic. And she feels that Netflix is really trying to gain an audience and make money, and that this is just something that they're doing in a cavalier way, but that there's a real danger to it, that as we were saying before on the show, we're in the middle of a spiritual battle. She explained that the zodiac is part of astrology, which is a tool of divination. And she has talked about how this was a tool she believed in, right? This is something she really lived her life by, things like horoscopes. A lot of people do. And just so we're clear, this is a system that's based on hidden meanings that people think they're finding in patterns with the moon, the planets, the stars, and it's all based on obviously when you're born. And so you start to believe in this information. You start to think, well, I behave this way because I'm a Capricorn, or, not only is it damaging spiritually because it opens doors to other things, right? It's sort of like a gateway drug to other bits and pieces of the occult. But in addition to that, it's dangerous in that it sort of gives you excuses for bad behavior sometimes, or like, oh, I am just this way. I don't need to change because of what my horoscope says I am. And so that's just a little bit. We've written about it. And you can kind of watch the interview, but there's a lot there, but she makes some really good points.
And what's her message, if she has one, to these Netflix executives who are producing this stuff?
Yeah, she said, look, Netflix, I don't have a problem with you being a secular company. Stay secular, stay in your lane, take the spiritual out of it. You do not need to be polluting people's minds, planting seeds in a spiritual aspect that leads to destruction, especially for the youth. Young people are a big concern to her because when she was 12, that's when she was introduced to the occult, and it led her down a very crazy, crazy path. So, look, these companies are going to do this stuff and it's in your face. And so it's up to us as parents and for grandparents and family members to make sure kids understand exactly what this stuff is.
Yeah. And it's out there and it's everywhere. And I was watching a baseball game the other night while I was working. I had it on in the background, and the first ad that came on was for, I think it was The Conjuring, like 18 or whatever it was. And it was just terrifying. I'm watching this thing and I'm like, good grief, I'm scared out of my shoes watching this thing. And I'm just wondering, man, people who aren't tethered to the gospel, they're not, solid in their faith and understanding of what real spiritual battles are, as we talked about before. And if you start diving into this stuff, especially not just for like a horror movie entertainment, but if you start diving into that sort of stuff, man, you're just opening some really dangerous stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's also like crazy, right? That we, as a culture, like we say, well, it's okay to believe in, the direction of balls of hot gas will tell you things about your life. But believing in the gospel or believing in God, that's crazy. That's crazy. That couldn't be true. But the movement of stars being tethered to, what your next job is going to be, that has some legitimacy to it. Let me just tell you. So, I think that is just spiritual blindness. That's where our culture is. I also would be curious to know, not that this just really matters that much, but like, is Netflix really tethering any of this to actual horoscopes, or are they just using algorithms like everybody else does? And, then people are going to say, oh my goodness, it actually works. And it's like, yeah, of course it worked, because it's tracking with 40 algorithms, what kind of shows you watch.
Yeah.
There's no actual spiritual component there. But the dangerous thing, to Nizza's point and to your point, Billy, is that people will believe that it is tied to something spiritual, when in reality it's just technology doing its thing.
Yeah. Final thoughts on this, Billy?
Well, yeah, I think the way that they do it, and I've not played around with this tool, obviously, but they try to, like, based on the personality of the film. Like, if the film or the movie is, I don't know horoscopes, right? So if you're an anxious person and you're a Libra, then like titles that deal with anxiousness, they're going to like, so they kind of like list them out, and you can see every horoscope. So it doesn't even actually link up to you, which is kind of crazy. So it's like, well, if I want to read, I want to watch a title under Dan's horoscope, I can just find it and do that. So the whole thing is a marketing ploy to get attention. That's what it is. Yeah. But it leads people into thinking about these things, a bit more. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly worth keeping an eye out for, as there's a sea of content out there. A lot of it not good, a lot of it not helpful for us or our kids. So certainly good to be aware of that one, and appreciate Jen giving the warning on that, as so many people are on Netflix these days just scrolling around for content, and sometimes wander into some stuff maybe they didn't realize what they were getting into. So appreciate that. All right, a pastor pushes back against sexualized content at public libraries. Our interview with him's coming up in 30 seconds.
My papa says the Messiah isn't real. He's just a story.
So what do you believe?
From the Salvation Poem Project comes Light of the World.
I really liked that movie.
You're really going to want your fam to see this. It's Jesus' life, so clear and so fun.
I want to see it again.
See the hand-drawn animated film everyone's talking about.
He's the king of all kings.
He's nothing.
He is the light of the world.
Light of the World. Opening in theaters September 5th. Rated PG.
And we're going to head to the main thing now. Pastor John Amanchukwu, he's known as the book banning pastor about the sexualized content being pushed on kids in public libraries, and specifically what happened at a library in Louisville, Kentucky came on to discuss. That conversation is today's main thing.
What's your immediate reaction to something like that? Certainly an unorthodox way of addressing it. Let's go in and take these books and then just not return them.
My initial response is, where do I send a donation to help this continue? All right. How do I help fund this mission? You know, respectfully, I don't think that any school should have books that seek to indoctrinate children into heterosexuality or into homosexuality, into transgenderism, into bestiality, and all of these other isms and schisms of our culture. I don't think that should be the focus of education. You know, we should teach students how to think, not simply what to think. That's what we should teach kids. But however, I'm steeped in this topic. I've now traveled to 21 states speaking up for kids, fighting against filth. You know, some people call it indoctrination, but I like to call it mental rape because it assaults the soul, it stains the brain, and it robs kids of their innocence. This book right here that I'm holding up is entitled Worm Loves Worm by J.J. Austrian and Mike Curato. This book is for kids ages 4 and up. And the focus of this book is that it talks about same-sex marriage. You know, there are two worms in this book that ultimately end up getting married. One of the pages says, "But which one of you is the bride? Ask the bees. And how can we be bridesmaids if we don't know who the bride is?" And then one of the worms says, "I can be the bride," says worm, and the other worm says, "I can too," says worm. And so both of the worms are going to be the bride, and then both of the worms are going to be the groom. And then the worms seek to get married. And so they ask Cricket in this book, the preacher, Cricket, the preacher, to marry them. And it says, "Wait," says Cricket, "this isn't how it's always been done." And then the worms say, "Then we'll just change how it's done," says worm. "Yes," says worm. And so this book is for kids ages 4 and up, and it pushes same-sex marriage on them. Now, just because the Supreme Court has made it legal for 2 men and 2 women to get married, it doesn't make it right. Heaven doesn't endorse the marital bond between 2 men and 2 women. But this has been the movement afoot in the American education system. And it's why even I launched my YouTube channel. You can go to John Amanchukwu to find out more about the episodes that I do on this same issue. You can go to John Amanchukwu as well on YouTube and see my documentary that details my national campaign on how to bring common sense back to education and to reclaim schools and communities.
You know, I want to talk, John, about what motivated you to get into this fight. But first, I want to ask you, how do you think we got to this place as a culture to begin with, where we're, sending our kids to schools and to libraries where they can check out books that are like this?
Well, Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light, light for darkness, bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter." When you start calling same-sex marriage and transgenderism and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even critical race theory good, that's where this comes from. But there's been a movement afoot by Marxist atheists for a long time to deconstruct Christianity and to push this ideology upon kids. Alice Bailey has been one of the main propagators of this content and information through her plan to create a society where Christ was dethroned. People like her and, you know, and many others, but that's where this comes from. It also comes from the weakening of the Christian church. You know, when only 36% of senior pastors have a biblical worldview, and only 13% of teaching pastors have a biblical worldview, and only 12% of youth pastors have a biblical worldview, you're going to have a problem. And so in the Christian church today, we have people talking about God and preaching from the Bible that don't trust and or believe God in how they should carry out their everyday lives. You know, I believe this, Trey, that weak pulpits create weak Christians. Weak pulpits create weak Christians. Weak shepherds create weak sheep. And that's what we're contending with today, you know, and I think that now more than ever, we need to have a come to Jesus meeting around the significance and the inerrancy and the infallibility of the Word of God. We need preachers to get back to believing the Word of God from Genesis to Revelations and to preaching the whole counsel of God's truth.
All right, Trey, appreciate that conversation there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast this week for one last thing.
We've got James 4:7, submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And this is just good advice in general, and it's such simple advice. Just do it. Like, push him away, resist him, and he will flee.
Yeah, it's a good formula that wins every time.
Absolutely. And God's going to help you in that one, right? Like, we can't do it on our own, but we're called to do it through the power of the Spirit in Jesus' name, and he'll be faithful in that. All right. Good spot to leave it this week on the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective, Lord willing. And that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here, well, on Tuesday. It's a holiday Monday. We'll be back here on Tuesday with more. God bless. We'll see you then.